Random access is a fundamental principle of modern computing. Random access allows blocks of electronic data to be accessed in any order. This is the principle that allows you to log into your computer, play a video on YouTube, type up and save a Word document or an email, open and read page 7 of a PDF, and click or tap through links on a website, all in no particular order and without the need to perform that same sequence the same way twice. Random access allows you to treat every item on your computer or smartphone as a discrete package of data that can be accessed in a nonlinear way, in any order, entirely randomly, at your own direction. And it's a concept that we likely never consider in our daily use of digital devices because for anyone using a digital computer from the late 1940s onward, it is a completely intuitive and essential aspect of our devices. It would be absurd to us if random access weren't possible. But things weren't always this way. Most early media technology was explicitly linear. If you made a phone call, the content of the call for the receiver was, of course, at the caller's direction to start, and the conversation would unfold over time. You clearly couldn't get different pieces of that conversation before they had happened. If you sent a message over a telegraph, each word was received letter by letter to eventually create an entire statement. And if you wanted to play a song, you would put a cylinder, a record, a cassette tape, an 8-track, or even an early version of a CD, all of which played from beginning to an end and listened until you got to the part you liked. If you're interested in a particular part of a TV show or a movie, even if you had it on VHS tape, you'd have to fast forward through all of the trailers and anything you didn't like to get to the part that you wanted. And hopefully whoever watched the tape before you had rewound it. So for much of the early history of electrical analog media, we were fast forwarding, rewinding, and actually physically placing the playheads of playback devices on these different forms of media storage to access the content we wanted. So in this circumstance, a continuous digital network like the web, based on the random access of billions of documents, web pages, videos, photos, and audio clips, would be way too impossibly time-consuming to access. Even with the best fast-forwarding technology, the time to get from the A section of the internet, like Amazon, to the Z section of the internet, like Zappos, or even the F section of the internet, like Facebook, would take years or maybe even decades. And then to add content, you would have to cut the storage device, probably a tape or something similar, where you wanted to insert the new content and then splice it together. So that is difficult enough, but that doesn't even say anything about the billions of people who would also want to access all kinds of different information at the exact same time. So clearly, with the proliferation of electrical analog media toward the end of the 19th century and then growing rapidly in volume in the first half of the 20th century, this became a really serious and pressing issue. So enter the memory index, or the memory extender. By the time Vannevar Bush wrote his most influential essay, which was called As We May Think, in 1945, he had already overseen numerous military projects for the United States Office of Scientific Research and Development, including the development of radar and the first nuclear weapons through the Manhattan Project. As the head of the OSRD, Bush coordinated thousands of scientists, upwards to about 6,000 scientists, and their research, and believed that an efficient form of data sharing among them and the governments of the world, and especially the United States, could avoid the information overload of sifting through the output of all of these different people. In addition, the rapid transmission and access to all of this data could head off international conflict or bring together different scientific advances in this post-World War, And that was especially important because the United States, which had dropped the first nuclear weapons, was no longer alone in the possession of them. So his speculative innovation that would allow the rapid sharing of information and possibly avert global catastrophe through a nuclear disaster was called the Memex. And while we might not be familiar with the Memex today because it was never actually made, we might know its cousin, which is called the microfilm reader or the microfiche reader, which operates on a similar base principle. Documents are photographed and then reduced to a microscopic scale, placed on a microfilm reel, which is similar to a reel of film for a movie, and then magnified and shown on a rear projection display. What made the Memex special, though, compared to the basic principle of microfilm, was its ability to create associative trails. Each frame of a microfilm reel in a Memex was coded. A user could pull up two different frames at once, give them the same code on a built-in keyboard on the Memex console, and the frames would be associatively linked, creating a trail of frames similar to how we might tag a document with a keyword. This created a mechanism where the user could intuitively associate multiple pieces of information with one another to create instantly accessible links between them. If this is starting to sound really familiar, it's because this is the fundamental idea behind the organization of the internet. This idea, in terms of the internet, is also known as hypertext. This principle of associative organization, linking from one idea to another out of a linear sequence, which was eventually recoined as hypertext, took off with the development of the first digital computers, namely the ENIAC in 1945. Now, with digital binary digits, or bits, that were part of a computer's random access memory and could be given unique addresses and accessed out of order, the Memex would finally become possible. Creating and manipulating data based on a set of rules that could run indefinitely or be modified and changed by a user would also appeal to artists who had been using analog versions of these systems for decades, often in things that they would call games, which closely resembled our idea of associative linking. The Dadaists of the early 20th century would experiment with algorithmically generated poetry, but without the aid of digital computers. And they would use predetermined rules which would generate random but logically reasoned combinations. Marcel Duchamp, a Dadaist himself, experimented with user interactions in art, asking viewers of his sculptures, specifically the revolving glass machine, which is also known as the rotary glass plates, to turn the apparatus on and stand away from it to view the optical illusion of continuity as it was spinning. The result of the artwork could vary depending on the compliance of the viewer to turn the machine on in the first place and how far they would stand. Duchamp also played directly with associative linking with his ready-mades, or appropriated items that are recontextualized as art objects, in a way not dissimilar from internet artists working with found documents, images, video footage, or even other people's HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, and recombining them to form new, novel connections and interactions. Another international interdisciplinary artist collective known as the Fluxus, who were active throughout the 1960s and 70s, created what they called event scores, which were conceptually modeled after musical notation. With their event scores, small, austere white cards would direct player participants to do things like make a salad, which was a score written by the artist Alison Knowles, or determine the limits of an object or event until further precision is impossible, which was a score written by George Brecht. Artists utilized the idea of the instruction set or program to generate repeatable performances that could be different every time they were executed. Experimental mid-century composer John Cage often closely associated with the fluxus artist, would generate compositions based off of coin flips or provide vague instructions for the performing of one of his works, saying to play an infamous 1987 piece as slow as possible. And that piece is now 19 years into a 639-year performance at the Halberstadt Cathedral in Germany. Additional movements contemporary to Fluxus, such as the Situationists International, utilized a form of unplanned movement through physical space called the derive, which is French for drift, which was based again off of simple sets of repeatable instructions, an algorithm, that encouraged the participant to get lost in their own city. The instruction set for a derive encouraged determinant or rerouting, and the instructions were meant to induce a state of mild, curious confusion, a piece of paper software programmed to change the psychology of whoever followed its directions, allowing the same geographical space to be reimagined as an endless assortment of psychogeographies. So, artists were well primed by the creation of the first true digital computers, and that really merely allowed them to scale the experiments they were already conducting up in a way that allowed thousands or even millions of new possible forms of these experiments. Limitations to physically accessing and being allowed to use digital computers, at least at first, prevented artists from fully taking off with this new medium. The fact that digital computers were extremely expensive, about tens of millions of dollars in today's money, and that they were enormous, requiring the kinds of space for one computer that we normally imagine in a modern data center would contain hundreds of individual computers, meant that digital computers were not very accessible to the general public. Most art developed with digital computers came out of special side projects at major institutions with significant technology funding. Places like the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where John Cage and Lejeune Hiller experimented with electronic music using the ILLIAC 2 digital supercomputer, and industrial science laboratories like Bell Telephone Labs, or also known as just Bell Labs, where Billy Kluver and James Tenney founded the organization Experiments in Art and Technology, also known as EAT, were vital in providing access to these otherwise scarce and expensive machines. Bell Labs, particularly in the 1960s, where the transistor, which is the tiny electronic switch at the heart of all of today's computers, was born, was likely the most prolific and well-known emerging technology lab in the mid-century. Creative engineers like James Tenney and Max Matthews synthesized some of the first algorithmically generated music there. In electronic and algorithmically generated music, they were also opposite Daphne Oram, who is known as one of the United Kingdom's first analog electronic music composers, while she was an audio engineer at the BBC.
Here, in a country studio in Kent, is Daphne Oram, a pioneer of a new type of music. Unlike the traditional composer, she uses no musical instruments and no musicians. She produces sounds by electronic devices, some of them sounds unlike any ever heard before. She needs no concert hall or opera house to put on a performance. She can do it on a tape recorder. The sounds, produced electronically, are recorded on tape. By mixing the sounds on various tapes together and playing them at varying speeds, she can produce all sorts of different combinations. Already, electronic music is being used in films, television, and the theatre, and there have been concert performances too. There are some people who think the music of the future will sound like this.
During this time, also, many Fluxus artists associated collaborations focusing on the idea of interactivity in analog and electronic media also emerged. And these included artists like Namjoon Paik and Charlotte Moorman. Merce Cunningham, James Tenney, and John Cage with their Variations 5 performance, and Alison Knowles and James Tenney with their House of Dust generative poetry collaborative. Fluxus artists who had, again, already been experimenting extensively with generative interactive works using physical media, which we called event cards, and event spectacles designed to draw immersed crowds, which were called happenings, took to electronic media and the computer readily. Meanwhile, other new media artists in the 1950s and early 1960s were now using custom-built or modified analog computers and repurposed electronic synthesizers to create their own experimental works. Sun Ra, a musician associated with the Afrofuturism movement in the 1960s, collaborated with Bill Sebastian on an image synthesizer that generated animations called the Outer Space Visualizer, which displayed surreal, colorful, psychedelic visuals set against Sun Ra's music. Often, analog computers used in experimental electronic computer art came from military surplus after World War II. John Whitney, considered one of the first computer animators, sometimes in collaboration with his brother James Whitney, retooled an analog computer that controlled anti-aircraft guns to program frames for his experimental animations. These animations, generated in black and white, were programmed frame by frame, with each frame individually photographed like a traditional hand-drawn animation. Color was added by hand afterward. Through the 1970s and 80s, digital computers and electronics began to precipitously drop in size and in price as the technology spread and economies of scale started to take over. Around this time, in 1977, Apple released the Apple II, which was the first mainstream and successful digital personal computer. And that increased access to this technology dramatically because the computer was also relatively easy to use with an originally black and white, but later color graphical display.
I'm here with an average American homemaker with her own Apple personal computer. Jill, do you use your Apple for household budgeting?
Actually, I'm working in gold futures.
Well, you could probably put a lot of recipes in there,
And you can do trend analyses, generate bar graphs.
Are you really a homemaker?
Of course.
So Apple is the appliance of the 80s for all those pesky household chores.
I also own a small steel mill.
This and an emerging consumer electronics market outside of personal computers also continued to reduce the cost of these tools dramatically. So, because of all of this increased access, during this time, a broader cohort of artists from more diverse educational, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds started to gain voices in new media. And we'll talk about this shift in the next lecture as we discuss the emergence of network and internet art through the 80s and 90s, and how that set the stage for one of the most powerful features of what we know of as the World Wide Web today.